this is where the NB can really let the team down. If you collect samurai swords, you'll easily fit 2 in this long net section back here.
Yes, yes, yes. We've heard it all before. The MX-5 or Miata is always the answer. But there are a couple of things, mechanically speaking, that you need to look out for.
How often have you seen someone driving an NB MX-5 without a smile on their face? Okay, so full transparency, we've already reviewed all of the other generations of Mazda MX-5, and between you and I, we absolutely bloody loved them. So surely it's going to be the same case with the NB, right? Well, maybe not. See, the critics claim that the NB lacks the charm and image of the NA, not to mention the pop-up headlights. It also apparently misses out on the NC's everyday usability and the ND's modernity. Not to mention, we are talking about a car here that is at least 20 years old. So has time taken its toll? And should you ever really consider buying one? Well, you know what? How about we find out, kicking off with what can go wrong with them and starting with the exterior. And yeah, unfortunately, that means talking about rust. That is, unless you're watching this from here in Australia or a warmer climate, because generally speaking, rust shouldn't be an issue. It's not impossible, but it's rare. However, if you're in a colder climate, especially with salted roads, you need to inspect these exteriors for rust. Check just about there. Seriously though, especially check the seals, the wheel arches, and the underside. And also, regardless of what location you're watching this from, check around the battery well, the windscreen drains, and any of the drainage points, as blockages can cause water buildup, and we'll get to why that's a nightmare in a second. And a hot tip too, and this also goes for cars in warmer climates like Australia, if you see any rust forming behind the front bar or the rear bar, you can see this by sort of poking your head up underneath there. Any rust in there, that's a really good sign that the car has had an accident and has been repaired very poorly. Also, check under the carpets in the base of the boot and make sure there's no signs of corrosion under there. If there is rust in the boot, this is a good sign that the roof has got some leakage issues. And the roof can leak in 2 ways. First of all, a failed rain rail, trust me, this is a pain in the ass to replace. It can let water leak into the boot, and that can rust the cover over the fuel tank. Also, blocked drainage channels can let water build up in the footwell, and eventually this can fry the ECU. Look, honestly, if you find rust in the boot, you might be better off looking into replacing the entire roof. And if you're in doubt with the car you're buying, just ask the seller if you can hose the whole car down to see if there's any leaks, or just stand out in the rain like this to see if it leaks. But again, any of these rust issues, they shouldn't be a problem in Australia at all. For those watching in the UK or North America, just be thorough with your inspection. And also, while we're in the boot, many battery retailers get the actual size of the battery wrong, and this means that the battery doesn't sit properly in the little bracket that houses it there, and it can come loose, and it can end up denting the basically inside of the floor and the inside of the panels. Some MX-5 enthusiasts call this MX-5 cellulite. Just do your homework, get the right battery, and it shouldn't fly around inside the boot. And finally, with the boot, this seems to be made of aluminium foil, so just be careful with overloading the boot and then closing it, because it can dent from the inside out. Now, the soft tops. Look, if these things are stored outside and just neglected in general, expect it to last about 10 to 15 years. And in terms of replacements, pricing can range from about $400 for something honestly pretty dodgy, through to about $3,000 for something very legit, and pretty much everywhere in between. And when they do fail, expect the stitching along here to start falling to pieces, or these seals to start coming apart. And look, obviously that's not ideal when it rains, like it is today. Now, the actual latches on the roof that hold the thing in place, these at this age can wear. Generally speaking though, it's the little security nub that tends to wear. You can replace the entire latch component, they're around about $200-ish, or you can replace just the security nub part for way, way less than this. It's actually a really good DIY project. For advice on this, check out the owners groups and forums. Brilliant place. However, if you're looking at one of the hard top versions, the latches on these, they can be damaged because people tend to over tighten them, and then they remain sort of loose forever, and they will need to be replaced. And remember, we are talking about a 20-year-old car here, so any of the rubbers, any of the plastic components, just make sure that they haven't turned all brittle. Chances are they haven't. These are actually pretty good for that. But on occasions, they can be guilty of failure. And then we come to the paint. And interestingly on this, a lot of owners claim that the paint on these is far superior to the original NA MX-5 and even the more recent ND MX-5. But on an NB, just check that the paint matches across the entire car. If it's obviously inconsistent between panels, good chance that car has had a tough life, maybe even an accident. Now, when it comes to exterior electronic gremlins, not much really goes wrong here because there's not much to go wrong. However, the powered antenna, These can sometimes fail to rise to the occasion. It's something that happens to the best of us, nothing to be embarrassed about. And also you can just replace the rising antenna with just a static one if size isn't an issue for you. Also, on occasion, the blinker relays, they can go on the fritz, but again, it's a really cheap and easy fix. Also, the powered windows, they're probably going to be slowing down by this age. Now, this can either be worn bushings or maybe the motor mechanism failing. Those motor mechanisms, the entire thing, they are starting to get expensive, but look, chances are it's actually going to be the bushings, not the motor, and the bushings, cheap and easy to fix. Now, on the topic of parts, because there are less and less parts out there, some of them are starting to ask a bit of a premium. For example, these carbon fiber air boxes, guess how much for a replacement one of these? You're looking at around about $3,000 if you can find one for sale in the first place. Don't stress if you're looking at a normal NB because only the ultra rare and very special SP has these. We'll explain why these are special in a second. But look, ignoring the SP just for a second, no matter what NB you're looking at, there are some critical differences between the iterations that you need to know about. See, while there are technically 4 iterations of the second generation NB MX-5, there are really 2 that you need to be aware of. It's the pre-update Series 1 cars and basically everything made after the update. And interestingly, many enthusiasts feel that the pre-update NB has more in common with the original NA MX-5 than it does with the post-update NB itself. And that's because so much changed with this update. I know aesthetically they look incredibly similar, but the sharper and more aggressive crease lines here and the fog lights are a dead giveaway. But a new 1.8 litre engine featuring variable valve timing was also introduced, along with a 6-speed manual gearbox replacing the old 5-speed unit. The steering and suspension were tweaked, the chassis was stiffened, and inside, look, to the untrained eye, they look near identical. But the seats received more bolstering, the gauge cluster changed, some of the trim turned silver, but most importantly, it's what's behind the scenes here that was improved dramatically. See, the pre-update Series 1 cars used old school methods like screws to keep all the interior bits and pieces in place, very similar to the original NA MX-5. But the post-update cars, well, they modernized all of these techniques, and interestingly, it results in an interior that is far less guilty of rattles and shakes and things like that. And from there, the Series 3 NB subtly enhanced and modernized the aesthetics again, and the suspension was tweaked slightly, and the same can be said again for the Series 4. But good news here if you are looking at a Series 1 car, because a lot of these more modern features can be retrofitted to the older NB. If you wanted to do that in the first place, because there's obviously going to be expense involved, and financially it might just be smarter to buy a Series 2, 3 or 4 car in the first place. Actually, this leads us into, what does an NB MX-5 even cost these days? At the bottom end of the spectrum, we're talking about a pretty tired old Series 1 car, you're looking at about $8,500. At the other end of the spectrum, can't believe I'm saying this, some are asking $50,000. If they're getting $50,000, might be a whole different story. 50 grand for an NB. Ugh. But what could be some really good news if you're looking at buying a used one? Over the last 10 years or so, the used prices have just been steadily increasing, especially for the more limited models like the Heritage Edition or the SE, but especially for these SPs. These are the ones asking like 50 grand. But what's so special about these SPs in the first place? Well, I'm very glad you asked. It all has to do with what's hiding just there. That's a turbo. And we're not talking about some backyard bolt-on kit here. The SP was fully factory-backed and designed and developed in-house here in Australia by Mazda's local special projects crew. And obviously Mazda couldn't just boost the 1.8 litres power by over 30% and leave it there. The brakes and suspension were all enhanced, the cooling system was upgraded, and visually, if you know what to look for, yeah, you can tell, it's an SP. And this all resulted in these things being the most powerful MX-5 ever built. It also has the best power to weight ratio. They only built 100 of them, and they were all sold here in Australia. Sorry, rest of the world. But look, don't fret, the SP inspired what we call the SE, and if you're watching this from outside of Australia, you probably called the Mazda Speed MX-5. Only, even though it's turboed, it's down on power and torque, so it's not as spicy or as cool as the original Turbo MX-5, our SP. But speaking of cool, we now need to talk about the looks of these things, because for some, this is where the NB can really let the team down. The NA, pop-up headlights, retro cool, awesome looking thing. The NC still divides opinion. The ND, what an aggressive little nugget of a thing that is, and just modernized to perfection. And the NB, I get where the criticism comes from. For me though, It's the least aggressive looking of all of the MX-5s. I don't think that's a bad thing. Also, I feel like this design language, I reckon it's becoming sort of retro cool now. But the same can be said for plenty of its direct competition. From Europe, you've also got the BMW Z3 and Z4, and the Mercedes-Benz SLK, and even the MG-F. Quick note as well, if anyone watching this has an MG-F or one of the SLKs, especially an AMG, and you live in Sydney and you'd be happy for us to film it, can you email me via the link below? We need to feature them. And then from Japan, you also have the Toyota MR2 Spyder, and at a bit of a stretch, the Nissan 350Z convertible. Also, we might have to give our award for the most supportive and least toxic owners groups and forum pages ever to the NB MX-5 groups. Seriously, we received hundreds and hundreds of messages and advice and knowledge when researching this car. Epic. But I have to give a massive shout out to Hayden Edward from the YouTube channel Shift Motoring. He is an absolute oracle when it comes to NB knowledge, and also to Richard, the legend, for lending us this car. Brilliant, brilliant people. Love them. Actually, you know what? As a thank you present to Richard for lending us his car, we're going to give him a free set of Wipertech wiper blades as a thank you present. And you need to get yourself a set of these Wipertech wiper blades because they're the only wiper blades we use. They're so easy to order online. They're great to fit and they work absolutely perfectly. And when you order a set via the link below, you're going to get 15% off and free express shipping. Do it. They're bloody awesome. Now to common issues and complaints inside. And you know what? Pretty good news. There are hardly any. If anything, the owners complimented just how resilient these interiors can be, and especially compared to the original NA MX-5, none of the plastics in here get anywhere near as brittle as they do in that car. And just the overall fit and finish, it feels multiple generations ahead as well. However, there are a handful of complaints about the tacho and the speedo losing signal intermittently. Not a hard fix, just check the owners groups and forums on advice on how to sort that. Also, the outer bolsters on the seats, they may have seen better days, but this is just an age and wear and tear and being exposed to the sun thing. Now, something for the Series 1 cars, the center console latch, it can fail, and the doors for the cup holders, they can get a bit too flappy, but this is so easily fixed, generally by just swapping in the Series 2 parts into the Series 1 car. Actually, like most things in an NB MX-5, as long as you've got a Phillips head screwdriver, an M10 socket, and some enthusiasm for DIY projects, most things are easily fixed. However, something that might be a little bit harder to fix is if you're looking at an SP or a model that has got a few interior options fitted. These metal gear knobs and this metal gear shift surround, these can go missing. Basically what happens is people take them off because they maybe don't want to scald their hand in the middle of summer on the metal gear knob, and then over time, they just go missing. And the issue here is that this stuff is no longer in production and they're nearly impossible to find on the used market. Also, some taller folk out there claim that the overall ergonomics and just being able to fit in one of these is near impossible for them. I don't know about that. I'm exactly 9 centimeters taller than famous MX-5 owner Steve Coogan. He actually owned an NB SE, and I fit just fine in here. Even with the roof up, I've got a decent amount of headroom. It's not too hard to get in and out. Obviously, you wear an MX-5 rather than sit in one, but that's kind of what you're signing up for. But everything is easy to get to, and honestly, I don't feel that cramped. I don't know what you're all complaining about. Also, another positive aspect about this interior I wasn't expecting is just how solid everything feels. Like, you know, this is what, a 20-year-old car, even older than that, and the fit and finish is really, really good. Not like, you know, Porsche 911 levels or Lexus levels, but super impressive for its age. But look, back to common complaints. Let's talk about the infotainment system, if you can even call that, because it's neither info nor tainment. It's basically a music box of sorts. And even if it's a replacement one, chances are it's going to get pretty old as well. It won't have Apple CarPlay or Android Auto as standard, and even the aftermarket ones that have been fitted, they probably won't either. Even the speakers, they suck, even when the car was brand new. By now, they've probably had the sword. But the good news here is there's loads of aftermarket equipment out there that can fix all this stuff. Actually, some of these aftermarket systems allow you to keep the original fascia, so the car looks completely stock, but at the same time, you can connect your phone via Bluetooth to the speakers and even take phone calls and all that sort of stuff. All you need is one of these, an Alpine PXE M60-4. Brilliant bit of gear. Where do you get one of these? Automotive Superstore. They'll also give you replacement speakers, sound deadening, some performance parts, engine parts. They carry over 400,000 different parts from over 500 manufacturers. So why don't you join the other 500,000 happy Aussie customers and hook yourself up with whatever you need. Automotive Superstore, mates of ours, legends. Now look, one of the reasons that not much goes wrong in here is because there's not much to go wrong. But this brings us to the point where we need to talk about the features and equipment fitted to the various trim specs. We've had several specs of NB here in Australia, and internationally, unlike plenty of other cars from this era and in this category, the range available isn't too ridiculous. And the levels of equipment are okay for this genre and age of car. And depending on the market and the year and trim spec of the model, various option packs have also been available, like the touring package or the sports package or even the leather package. Plus there have been optional extras like Bose sound systems, body kit enhancements, and even limited slip diffs and automatic transmissions. Although Mazda Australia never offered the LSD as an option here, and look, unless you need it for, say, mobility or medical reasons, we're not sure why you'd buy an automatic. Trust us, learn to drive a manual, and in an MX-5, you will see the light. Also, if you want every minute detail of what each trim spec has in terms of features and options and all that sort of stuff, you've got to check out Miata.net. Be prepared though, you will lose hours of your life. I know that from experience. We've added a link down below. Yeah, go check it out, it's amazing. But look, as far as living with this interior, as I mentioned, the ergonomics are spot on. I kind of do wish the seats were just a little bit more supportive and maybe a little bit lower. I'm being very, very picky though. Design-wise, it's an interior, it exists. As far as places to fit all your nicks and knacks, you've got a little storage cubby hole here, but that's not gonna fit a phone. You've got your little cup holders here. My small pretentious coffees, like a ristretto with a touch of oat milk, it's just gonna flop all over the place there. You've got more storage here. Also, fun fact, this is where your boot and fuel release levers are. Glove box there, actually pretty decent size. There's no storage under the seats. There's obviously no sunglasses holder up there. There are door bins. They're completely pointless. You're not going to fit anything in there that has 3 dimensions. Little map pocket here. And if you collect samurai swords and you need to travel with them, you'll easily fit 2 in this long net section back here. Really good. Oh, also, there is a little shelf here. Can someone explain to me what's the point of that? What are you putting there? Let us know in the comments. Also, there is a cigarette lighter, but there's no ashtray. So I think the assumption is that you're just gonna flick your ash out into the public like some inconsiderate asshole. Then as far as practicality in the boot goes, you know, there are better cars out there for that, but let's be honest, you're not buying an MX-5 for its levels of practicality. In saying that, I used to own an NA MX-5 and I did a few weekend trips away and fit enough luggage in here for a good time. And speaking of a good time, why don't you become a part of the 25% of people that watch our videos and actually subscribe, rather than the other 75% that haven't hit that subscribe button yet? It honestly helps us out so much and allows us to make more free content for you. But another link you should hit is the membership one down there for even more ReDriven perks. Plus, there's another link down there that will take you to the NB MX-5 cheat sheet. Now, this is a must read if you're buying one of these. We've listed out all the common issues and a few other things. Check it out, links below, and it's free. But now to what the MX-5 is all about, the driving experience. But you know what, let's get the bad news out of the road first. Firstly, you've got to be so careful of shitty mods. We're talking eBay spec coilovers or just budget suspension components. These things weigh hardly anything. You're looking at maybe a smidge over a ton, and this means they're very sensitive to changes in the suspension, not just the geometry, but the equipment as well. If you're gonna lower it or you're gonna take it to the track or do anything with the suspension, do your homework, use really high quality items. Get on the owners groups and forums, there's plenty of great advice there. Secondly, the shift feel, which should be amazing, but unfortunately at this age, plenty of the bushes may have left the chat. Now this is a pretty cheap and easy fix, and if you want an even tighter feel than the standard car, there are a host of aftermarket options out there. And do it too, because when the bushes start to go, it can just completely detract from the driving experience. Also, quick tip on the mods, and it's one that is all too often overlooked. Think about fitting a Recaro style one-piece racing seat. It can make a huge difference to the overall driving experience. In saying that, just do your homework on how legal they are depending on where you're watching this from. But besides that, it's all positives for the MX-5, but you knew that because how often have you seen someone driving an NB MX-5 without a smile on their face? Yes, the NB often gets accused of being just too slow or being a hairdresser's car, but let's be honest, anyone that says that either hasn't driven one or maybe their ego is still the dominant force in their personality. Plus, the entire reason this whole genre of car even exists, performance cars in general, is just to get as much enjoyment as possible through the medium of driving. And the NB nails that brief. However, adding a turbo to this mix takes that brief and just sets it alight. I've never driven an SP before, and I never want to stop driving an SP ever again. But also, don't think because this was sort of factory developed that it's some ultra refined power plant and the whole car feels totally cohesive like just the most beautifully formed package. Yeah, it doesn't. This thing has the classic early 2000s turbo car kind of vibe going on here. It's raw and it's ultra tactile. And I tell you what, in the rain like today, you really have to have your wits about you. Look, it's not completely out of control. Like, you know, it's not running huge amounts of boost. So mid-corner, it's not like all this boost comes on and next minute you're exploring someone's front yard. It is manageable, but it does give you this impression that there's maybe a little bit too much power for this chassis. And also with the SP, don't focus on the power figure, focus on the torque figure. This thing around town, normal driving, just changing lanes, pulling out of an intersection, it just makes the entire process so much easier, which makes it more enjoyable. You don't have to rev the guts out of it to go anywhere and be antisocial, banging off the red line. It just, there we go. 40k an hour, done, just fun. But then in saying that, it still does all the wonderful MX-5 things. There's almost no filter between your body and the car's steering or the pedals or the seat of your pants or the overall experience. So the whole car feels like it's an extension of your body. Honestly, you feel so connected with it. Like this is just, you know, suburban street, little corner. Just that is so enjoyable because you feel so connected with the car all of the time. And that's why it's one of the all-time greatest driver's cars. So it absolutely nails all the driving stuff, but what about mechanically? What's the story there? I can't tell you because I'm not a qualified mechanic. But you know who is? It's Jimbo Slice.
Look, at this age, there is a bunch of things that will need some TLC. The cooling system is one of them. You need to have a good look at all the hoses. They're likely to be hard if they've never been replaced. They're going to be due. Check the radiator as well. It's probably on its last legs. Have a good look at the coolant overflow tank. They can get a bit crusty and start leaking. Interesting though, with that tank, that is not pressurized. That tank can leak and all the coolant can leak out and it's not going to stop the car. So if you read on a forum somewhere that you have to buy a very expensive aluminium tank to replace it, that simply is not the case. You can get a completely stock standard plastic one and it'll do just fine. Oil leaks, yeah, they have a few. The valve cover is a known area, the rear main oil seal and the front crankshaft seal as well. Now the front crank seal, if that's leaking, that equals timing belt death. You do not want oil on your timing belt. The timing belt is due, incidentally, every 100,000 Ks or 7 years. If there's no history of it being done or if it's got relatively low mileage on it, just do it because the last thing you want is a broken belt. Although these are not an interference engine, they can break without catastrophic damage. It's just a huge pain in the ass. So yeah, do the timing belt. Ignition coils on these, look, they're not inherently bad. They're just 25 years old, so it's likely they're going to need doing. Now, unlike the NA Miata, the NB has like a solid cam lifter with shims in it to adjust the valve clearances, unlike the NA that's got hydraulic lifters. So if you do have noisy tappets, it's not a quick fix just with some hydraulic lifters. You will actually have to get it set properly with shims, and it's not common, but it's not a quick fix should it happen. Now the turbo models, there are some reports of turbo failures here. Look, they've got to be serviced, and even when they have been serviced, at this age it'd be a great idea to take off the oil supply line and just clean it out because they get a lot of carbon and crap in there, and if that should have a restriction there, the turbo can quite easily get damaged. And check the drain as well while you're there. That oil's got to come in and go out without any issues. There are some reports too of the exhaust manifold cracking. not hugely common, and you have to replace the manifold when that happens. Now, a more serious issue that can happen is the crankshaft thrust bearing. That basically is the bearing inside the engine that controls how much end float or crank walk that crankshaft has. When that fails, if it fails bad enough, it can destroy the engine, but typically before then it's making a horrible noise. There's no quick fix here. It just more often than not means the engine has to be pulled apart and a new bearing put in. Now, interestingly, it can be made worse by heavy-duty clutches, because a heavy-duty clutch requires a lot more force, and that pushes a lot more force on the crankshaft and can wear that bearing prematurely. So if you're putting a heavy-duty clutch in it, you might want to just keep an eye out for that as well. Now, the transmissions in these, yes, they are a little bit piss weak. A lot of owners complain about crunchy shifts because the synchro's a bit underdone. I would say slow down the shifts and change the oil frequently, and that will extend the life of the transmission, especially in the SP, because more power, more torque means more transmission wear. Another thing with the transmission, you are likely at some point to need a clutch master and slave cylinder. They're probably leaking by this age as well. Overall, mechanically speaking, in stock form, yes, these actually are very reliable. And it's no surprise really that this platform is so popular across so many types of motorsport. But just look out for drifty boy shitty mods, because shitty mods, well, all bets are off.
But we still haven't answered the big question yet. Should you buy an NB MX-5 at all? Of course you should. Just make sure it's the right one. Unless the intention is to buy a project car, look, we'd be avoiding any that have clearly had the, let's call it the rice treatment, because look, there's a high chance they've been driven with minimal mechanical sympathy, and even more of a possibility that every financial corner has been cut. Plus, they look shit and people will judge you. But even when it comes to great examples of these that have passed a pre-purchase inspection with flying colours, which iteration of NB MX-5 should you buy? Well, think of the Series 1 pre-update examples as basically an improved NA MX-5 for less money. They feel just as soulful and honest as the pop-up headlight original, and they're arguably the best value for money NA you can buy, just that they're wrapped in an NB body shell. But the Series 2, 3 and 4, they're just easier to live with, and they don't lose any of the MX-5 charm. These are the ones to get. However, these SPs, these are something very, very special. It is a much more serious MX-5. So think of it kind of like the difference between a normal NB and an SP is like seeing two twins, but you know one of them's a psychopath. But look, overall, the NB MX-5, it's the classic Casio G-Shock of cars. It's tough, it's reliable, and it's so iconic that even those that can afford cars asking multiples more have nothing but respect and admiration for it. And they probably have one in the collection too. But for whatever reason, if you can't buy one, at least try to have a drive of one, because everybody, at least once in their life, should enjoy how wonderful these things are to drive. But we have a bonus bit, because now that we've featured all 4 generations of MX-5, which do we think you should buy? The original NA is now just for the committed enthusiast. It needs TLC these days, and look, I know from experience, it can be a bit of a challenge to live with. The NB takes everything the NA does so well and just turns up the volume while also just being more pleasant daily. The NC is arguably the worst MX-5 of the bunch, but arguably the best car of all of them, and take that how you will. And the ND, look, it is utterly wonderful. It feels like a wonderful modern interpretation of the original, maybe just not as raw or as silly, and it's often the most expensive. And I'm not sure if it's quite worth the premium compared to the older cars if we're talking pure driving entertainment. And for me, what would I buy? If I had to leave it completely standard, it's one of these, an SP and a heartbeat. If I was allowed to modify it a little bit, it's an NC. Kicking off with, see, because we've now featured ruining the tape. But the thing is, we still haven't answered the big question. However, there are a handful of complaints about the tacho and the speedometer losing signal intermittently. Not a hard fix, just check the owner's